Welcome to the fifth video in the free will training. In the previous videos we talked about the will and the willpower, mostly about the differences that they have from the common conception of will that most people think about, as well as the integration of your lower self impulses and the exercise that you can start doing. We talked about when the will is used correctly, then it's no longer a struggle to do something, a fighting or a heavy resistance. Instead, you rarely struggle or have pain. It's an harmonious and congruent action. Everything feels aligned. You integrate the impulses of your lower self that are distracting you from your true intentions. But sometimes you do need the full power of the will. You do need to overcome difficult situations, or you don't have time to work on your lower self impulses and you just need to connect to the full-blown will. This is where the will state comes in. The will state is a way to apply your will in its full capacity, a way to truly connect with it aside anything else. The will state is a complete obedience of your mind and body to your will. There's no anxiety, no nervousness, no repression, just an act of will. When you use it, you override the automatic aspects of your body, mind, and energy with your will, with the connection to yourself. It's an harmonious and fully conscious state, not of effort, but of unity and flow. The goal of the will state, also called act of will, is to understand the internal state that allows you to connect with your source of will and inner power in a way where you won't create this armor and generate energy repression with its obvious downsides. This way, it's possible to use this power healthily, empowering us without any type of side effects. It unifies your whole body, mind, and energy under the control of a central command. There's no anxiety, nervousness, or repression. It's just an act of will. As you can imagine, it's a beneficial state for all situations in your daily life. Your mind, body, and energy surrender to your will. They simply know that resistance is futile, so it just gives up trying to come up with excuses, anxiety, or fear. Keep in mind that this is not a logical or a rational conclusion of your mind. In many situations, you know that you are going to do something, yet you are still nervous or anxious. For example, you know that you have to give that speech or presentation. After all, your job depends on it, yet you are still nervous. Why? This happens because there isn't an alignment of your mind, energy, and intention with the will. Your rational mind knows it will do something, but your subconscious is still trying to avoid and control it. This means that your mind is still trying to control the outcome of what it wants, rather than surrendering to the true power of the will. Hence, it generates this anxiety, nervousness, or fear. If you try to overpower it, you will repress this intense emotion, causing even further harm and a possible panic attack soon. With the will state, you aren't overpowering anything, you are unifying it. The will state feeling completely differs from the Victorian will. As you have seen, the Victorian will is a very muscular type of feeling. You resist, you tense, you endure. While the will state, it's a much more energetic feeling. You absorb, you transform, you accept, you redirect its strength. When you enter this state, you decide, then no matter what, nervousness or resistance suddenly disappears, even if you're walking to face certain death. This is easily seen in the Japanese samurai ritual of seppuku, a suicide ritual used by samurais to die with honor, where they disembowel themselves. Historical texts have mentioned that their calmness and steady mind at the same time that they are disemboweling themselves. The moment they decide they will do this, you wouldn't see any fear in them. You would only see an act of pure will, a fully conscious decision. Yet, I'm sure you can agree that this will be a very good reason to be fearful about. Much worse than any of the situations that you may have in our modern life. You know, in the depth of your being, that you're going to do this. There's no turning back, so everything becomes a line. Your mind knows this and knows that all resistance is futile, so it just gives up trying to come up with excuses like anxiety or fear. Instead, your mind surrenders to your will. Fortunately, your daily use of the will state will most certainly be easier than that. For example, in his memoirs, Carl Jung recollects how in his childhood years he started having fainting fits. This was because another kid knocked him unconscious once, and then he gradually developed fainting as an unconscious defense mechanism. The fainting fits started to affect his life. His parents consulted several doctors who didn't know what was wrong with him. So, here's the description directly from his words in his biography. My parents became more worried than ever. Then one day, a friend called on my father. They were sitting in a garden and I hid behind a shrub, for I was possessed of an insatiable curiosity. I heard the visitor saying to my father, "And how is your son?" "Oh, that's a sad business," my father replied. "The doctors no longer know what is wrong with him. They think it may be epilepsy. It would be dreadful if you were incurable. I have lost what little I had, and what will become of the boy if he cannot earn his own living?" I was thunderstruck. This was the collision with reality. Why then, I must get to work, I thought suddenly. From that moment on, I became a serious child. I crept away, went to my father's study, took out my Latin grammar, and began to cram with intense concentration. After 10 minutes of this, I had the finest of fainting fits. I almost fell off the chair. But after a few minutes, I felt better and went on working. "Devil take it, I'm not going to faint," I told myself, and persisted in my purpose. This time, it took about 15 minutes before the second attack came. That too passed like the first. "And now you must really get to work." I stuck it out. And after an hour came the third attack. I still did not give up and worked for another hour until I had the feeling that I overcome the attacks. Suddenly, I felt better than I had in all the months before. And in fact, the attacks did not reoccur. From that day on, I worked over my grammar and other school books every day. A few weeks later, I returned to school and never suffered another attack, even there. The whole bag of tricks was over and done with. This is when I learned what a neurosis is. So notice what Jung did here. He used an act of will, particularly when he said, "Why then, I must get to work." When this is stated right from the depths of our will, then we know it's serious, and we know we will succeed. The act of will places your body, mind, and energy under the control of the will, so you can do what you set out to do. This way, you could overcome potential serious matter just by willing it. But it must be your true will. It's not enough to merely say something as you constantly say to yourself. No, this comes from the depths of your being and affects everything. Just like those smokers of 20 years who one day say they will not smoke again, put the cigarettes aside, and it's done. No therapies, no hypnosis, no cures, nothing. Just a pure act of will. One question that I'm often asked is, why not simply use the will state for everything instead of the integration of the impulses and knowing your animal self and everything that we talked about before? If you try it, you'll immediately realize how this is not doable. First, because it requires a full, conscious, strong decision every single time, which is quite hard to accomplish in practical terms. And secondly, without the awareness of your impulses, the urges of your animal self, you'll quickly re-enter into the Victorian will and repression of those impulses, with all the negative consequences that it brings. It's very easy to fool yourself into thinking that you are using the will state, but in reality, you are only repressing your impulses. The will state is the unification of body, mind, emotions with the will, but it requires a deep commitment and decisiveness that isn't always easy or suitable to do, at least with the most minor decisions in life. Your mind will most likely get in the way. Sometimes you may think that you want something, but in reality there will be something holding you back. And until you are 100% committed and with the correct mindset, the will state will not work for you all the time. While with the awareness of your impulses and the animal self, as we talked about before, you go into the depths of your being, and even smaller decisions like what you'll have for lunch, you can recognize the signature of your animal self and the different impulses and make a different decision if you see fit. You don't require a deep commitment or a strong mindset, just a bit of awareness and a minor intention, which tends to be a lot easier to accomplish even in those minor life decisions. Still, the will state can be used for many different feats and areas of life that require a bigger boost. Weightlifting is surely one of them. But I must give a general warning about using it in physical feats. Although it's useful to do this, it can also be dangerous, since it's very easy to push your body to a place that is not ready for and become injured. It's like if you turn off the pain when you put your hand in a fire. Your hands can be burning and you won't feel anything, but you'll still have the burn mark in there. So it's a lot easier to be injured. Do you know who Philippides is? Philippides is the central figure in the story that inspired the modern marathon race. It is said that he ran from Marathon to Athens to deliver news of a military victory against the Persians at the Battle of Marathon. When he got there, he died. Whether it's a legend or a true story doesn't quite matter here, as this is something that can certainly happen. He used the will state to push over the pain to deliver the important news to his companions as fast as possible. But he didn't notice his body giving out, so he went over his limit and died. I'm sure that his body gave out a few miles before, but his will was the fuel that kept him going. With that, we understand that the will state is simply a label for a state that exists in all mankind. Some traditions and cultures elicit consciously, like the Vikings berserkers that have an extreme will state, while most others simply get into that state when it's needed without giving it a name, but it's there. So yes, the will state can be quite powerful to push you a bit over the limit. And we can all be pushed a little bit over our limits since we're far from our true limits. But you do need to keep in mind that your body has limits. You can use the will state safely in bodybuilding, for example. It can be quite useful when you focus your whole energy and will on the muscle that you exercise. When you bring all your energy, will, and focus on the growth of that particular muscle group that you are exercising, you'll be quite surprised by the results and the growth that can be achieved. And you can even be below your weight limit, but still grow astonishing muscle. Although the will state tends to be this temporarily will connection, there's also a permanent act of will, or a permanent will state. This is when you decide on something that affects the core of your being. We've all heard or met individuals stop negative habits or start positive ones from one day to the next with little effort and side effects. Most likely, you also had an uncle or a friend who woke up one day and decided to quit his 20-year smoking habit and haven't smoked since, with very minimal cravings. Or someone who decided to be a vegetarian from one day to the next and hadn't had meat since 1995. So, how can someone quit smoking cold turkey or quickly transform his diet without feeling the cravings or emotional upheavals most people have? What's the difference between those who quit smoking cold turkey with no cravings and those who go back and forth and never seem to stop even though they try 100 different methods? It's undoubtedly not the traditional Victorian notion of willpower, since one person barely has any cravings while the other lives with cravings every day he doesn't smoke. So he would need to apply much more of the traditional willpower and would have much more repression. The difference is in a will state. In this case, an act of will that permanently changes your energy. A permanent act of will in that particular decision if you must. It's a decision that you consciously take that changes a crucial and essential part of you. While the other person tried the 100 different methods unsuccessfully, never actually made that decision, at least on this profound level. Maybe they decided on a superficial level, but never truly wanted it. This is not related to what they say to themselves. The inner voice is probably the same in both cases. But the overall feeling, attitude, and energy are entirely different. And this makes all the difference in the world. In the first case, the decision is 100% accepted. So in other words, you are surrendering to your decision. While in the other case, you are still resisting the decision. It's the same in personal and sexual magnetism, for example. If you keep resisting your decision to be magnetic or sexual, you can try 100 different methods and you'll always fail. But once you accept your decision and fully embrace the new energy, the new behaviors, and the new thoughts, then you'll genuinely change. The permanent act of will is more of a profound core change in yourself. Not as easy to do and accomplish as the will state, but it's a potent change agent. But you do need to understand what is the repression of the impulses and urges to successfully use this. As you see, there's much more to willpower than meets the eye. In the past texts of magnetism and energy training, they often speak about this type of superior mental supremacy and superior states of mind in connection to your will as crucial states to be in move more energy and achieve influence, but they don't explain the practical and working techniques to get there. So it all remains on a vague type of description. Yet this is the crucial key to unlock many great powers inside of you. And in fact, there isn't one technique to get there. It's only about making you realize that this state is how you can access it. But in fact, this state is accessible to you at any moment, even right now, as long as you decide to enter it. In Charisma School, we develop easier techniques for you to recognize, understand, and develop this superior mental state and connect with your will. And it won't take decades of training like the old samurais either. We consider this technique so important that we made it available as a bonus free course to all Charisma School students who have bought one of our longer courses. But it's vital to do it with the 10 steps to inner power. And if you want to take it a step further, then Will Mastery, where you can really understand the will. Both of these courses combined are crucial in the development of your magnetism and will. Next week, in our last video of this series, we'll talk about the importance of the will in charisma and personal magnetism.